Hi, I'm Arn Menconi, and I'm here interviewing with my first Skype call author, director, filmmaker, John Wellington Ennis. And John's made a lot of different documentaries. I've been following him, and we're going to talk about what he's been doing in terms of filmmaking and also what he can bring to us in the way of what he's learned in making a difference. So, John, you grew up in Evanston in Chicago, and
Yep.
then did you break into filmmaking? How did you get your start?
Well, Arn, I guess, growing up in Evanston, I was lucky in a lot of ways because it's a particularly diverse public school system. And so that ended up really sort of shaping my viewpoint leaving Evanston, which was, that there's rampant racism that, we can get past just by mutual interaction, and that public education is one of the most vital things that we can offer in this country. So I was always into theater and writing editorials in high school, and so I was lucky to get into film school when I was coming out as a senior. So I went to USC and then transferred to NYU, and I was always interested in the sort of questioning authority, but it takes a long time to understand why things are corrupt. You can sort of, I think when you're an adolescent and you start to become really, you start to question a lot, you can sense when things are disingenuous, but you might not necessarily understand why things work the way they do. And so I guess maybe 20 or so years later, after I've gotten out of college, I've, been able to sort of start to really, for the first time, run my fingers along those levers of power and see how everything that affects, the disenfranchised communities, to the educational system, to our environment, all sort of stem back to the decisions people in power make to make more money.
Well, I've been following your career. I found you through the movie Pay to Play. So that's one of where you are in your career, and you've got a book going on. But explain to us what made you do Play to Play, and what did you learn doing Pay to Play?
Well, Pay to Play was an offshoot of my first feature documentary, Free for All. I'd gone to Ohio in 2006 to try to make sense of two things. One was this ridiculous story about coins and what is sort of said about one party rule and how corruption works in Ohio. And the other were questions that were lingering about the legitimacy of the 2004 election in Ohio. And so as I traveled around that summer, around Ohio and talked to candidates, I amassed so much story in that time that it ended up becoming two films. My producer, at one point, we had this 2.5 hour film. She said, why don't we make one film about elections, and that's Free for All, and we'll make this other film about campaign finance, and that'll be Pay to Play. We'll pick that one up later. Because I had, besides finding out so much evidence of, tampering and manipulation and, specific acts of voter suppression, I was struck by looking at, I was going through a ballot warehouse in Ohio, and I was looking at all these names on ballots that had been discarded of people who ran for office, and I just started thinking, it's so hard to get your name on that ballot in the first place, and then everybody's ballot, everybody's entire democratic voice is divvied up into these two names, which they may not really know much about either of them or really care about either of them. And it seems like that's really the feat, is getting on the ballot in the first place. And maybe if we had better people on the ballot, it wouldn't be such close elections that you're still combing through these discarded provisional ballots, a year or 2 years later to figure out what really happened, because so many more people would vote. So I started trying to be, realistic about what it would take. And so one of those things that, really matters is that Ohio, no matter what you want to think about the country or where we should go, Ohio is going to be the ultimate swing state for probably ever. There's a lot of efforts at reform going on right now, but nobody's talking about getting rid of the Electoral College. And I don't know that we ever really could, because it requires such coordination with states that would be giving up some kind of franchise. And so I wanted to find out what there was in Ohio that would actually help us. And as I went around, I was surprised to find some really funny, nice, likable first-time candidates that showed this sort of idea of citizen politicians. And so I met this guy, Paul Hackett, who was an Iraq War veteran who had come back from the war and actually run as an anti-war Democrat. And he really brought a lot of realistic knowledge to what he was trying to run for at the time when the country was in the throes of the Iraq War. And still escalating. And the other was Subodh Chandra. Subodh Chandra was an activist attorney in Cleveland, the other side of Ohio. And even though he was the biggest Democratic Party geek and loyalist, he was ending up getting the shaft by his own party because they preferred to prop up their own chosen guy for attorney general and not let the primaries run its course. And so that was bad enough on its own, but with the fact that the guy that they pushed up instead ended up resigning in disgrace 17 months later, and the party had gone to lengths to illegally manipulate the primary process by destroying campaign materials. That actually came out in a much bigger story in Ohio because in part of this movie. After the election, and that Ohio Democratic Party chairman stepped down after that election. And so these kinds of things made me realize that it's really not just getting the ballots counted. It's not just really getting all the money, And so there's, I wanted to keep trying to be able to tell the story of all these other things that end up happening, because you see these really inspired candidates, and they get disenfranchised when they find out, like, sort of what goes into running for office. And it's like, no, if you knew what it was going to be going in, you might not have been so disenfranchised, and you might have done a better job. And so as much as I could try to illustrate these problems for people, that was what I started to realize became more and more like this big game board. And so that's how the sort of sense of pay to play as a Monopoly board game first started to take shape.
The thing that your coffee mug makes a sound that sounds like a dog's collar.
This is Kevin. He's down here. Just quick. Yeah. So yeah,
hey Kevin.
He's joining us on the interview here. He gets a lot of say. But yeah. So anyway, sorry.
And it's Kevin.
Kevin. Yeah, my daughter named him Kevin.
All right. So look, I was a former county commissioner, so I totally get it's not just Ohio. When I was looking into a state senate race, or when I was calling around saying what does it take to go into a congressional race, it's always about how much money can you raise. And there's a process, and there's a lot of different moving parts, but money plays a huge. Money is the mother's milk of politics, is what former U.S. Senator Mark Udall said to me, and I think he got that from his father, Mo Udall, who had run for president. What is if you wanted to explain it to a person in high school? What's the main takeaway from Pay to Play?
Well, what I found over the course of making Pay to Play is that it starts out with me feeling sort of overwhelmed, looking at the bleak future that my daughter might be facing because of so many problems that can only be fixed once we fix the money in politics problem. And so over the course of this film, you see, and I don't like to give it away because it's so crazy how these things unfold, but essentially, you see outside first-time candidates running for office. You see muckraker journalists who uncover huge scoops. You see street artists. You see first-time board game makers take on the biggest board game company in the world and win. And one by one, while it's sort of cast as my journey through these stories, there's a remarkable amount of inspiring individuals that can't do anything about it, because in a large part, it's people doing that first step that really starts to set off a whole chain of reactions that we're not always able to see ourselves.
So, what I'm getting here is I just want people to know that this is a guy that I just cannot even believe I'm talking to. When you watch his movies and you've studied anything about politics and are trying to figure out, as a citizen journalist, as a person who's trying to do something in your local communities, if you're trying to do something about getting money out of politics, and you watch any of John's movies, I just recently found Free for All. You can't help but feel like your mind is exploding with, how did he decide to start here and then get there, and then all the zigzagging that goes on along the way. So one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to John was just, this is the process. John didn't start with a straight line and I'm going to start with the end in mind and I'm going to go here. He describes in these movies very well how the process sort of dictates the creative areas. So he didn't go in necessarily with the hypotheses. It's not like he's a conspiracy theorist and says, I'm going to do this. And he finishes one piece of work, and then that leads to another piece of work, and then it leads to another. And all the people that he meets are saying, hey, did you know about this? Did you know about that? And the thing that John, I mean, you have to watch, I implore you to watch Free for All, because we're in an election season right now, and that was filmed in '04. It was a midterm election, correct?
That's what it said. Yeah, we filmed over '06, but there's footage going from 2000, 2004.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was a governor's race primarily.
Correct. Yeah, that's what we framed. Yeah, you asked
right.
what we, how we tell these stories and all these things. Yeah, we framed that movie by following Ken Blackwell running for governor in Ohio in 2006 while investigating his administration of the 2004 election, Secretary of State. Right. So there's a lot of crazy things in that movie, but that's the one sort of through line is following his election.
And Blackwell was also just happened to be George Bush's treasurer for his presidential his chair for his run, and he was running for governor as the sitting Secretary of State.
So he gets to administer his own election, and
probably had a lot to do with George Bush's election.
Yeah, he really did. It was no small feat what they pulled off.
No, and George Bush's predecessor, Blackwell's predecessor to George Bush as chairman was the Florida chair.
Correct. Yes, Kathleen Harris.
Right, and Florida and Ohio are considered to be the two most important states in determining a presidential election. So I don't want to get too much into all of that, but it's really about.
But I think if I could just help you make that point, really, the film sort of connects how much power the Secretary of State has, and as somebody who's gone through these civic administrative positions, you can understand how you can be surprised all the rules that one person can make, all the tie-breaking decisions they get to decide, and the amount of partisanship, really, and so. If the Secretary of State position doesn't necessarily have to be such a partisan pedestal, but with Ken Blackwell and then with his successor in Ohio, John Husted, you see how bad people are still trying to use this public office to try to help their party.
We're back, but the question I was going to ask in Free for All, you discover this. I can't even believe it, scenario. And the part that there's a lot of reasons I can't believe it, but one is I was a county commissioner during that time period. And I would think that someone like me who has a clerk of the court, a county clerk, would have known about what was going on in Ohio after that was uncovered. So the point of that is you revealed something that was extraordinary. And here it is almost 10 years later. How much do you think that story and that realization has gotten out?
Yeah, I think I believe what you're referring to is about the story of Mike Connell, the
No, actually,
the GOP IT tech.
how the votes would actually divert themselves, the computerized votes,
Right.
the Diebold system
Yes.
would go into some version of, if you looked at it as plumbing, it rerouted itself, went through a different type of computerized system, recalibrated the votes for the candidate of its choice. I mean, we're both from the Chicagoland area. You know, Mayor Daley. There's an old joke where the Soviet Union needed polling booths for their election, and they called up Chicago, sent theirs over, and Mayor Daley won for Prime Minister of the Soviet Union. So it was sort of like that, where these things were channeled through, and again, I mean, that should have been something that just completely blew open the doors on how our democracy is so rigged. But it hasn't changed things. We have more and more computerized voting machines. Ohio is not any more regulated by checks and balances. There wasn't necessarily lawsuits. As you point out in the movies, you have John Kerry decides not to throw a lawsuit. What people know historically is that Al Gore didn't challenge and ask for more counting of the whole state of Colorado, which later independent groups did and would have proved that he would have in Florida.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it begs the question, if you get involved in activism and you reveal these things like I did, like when I interviewed Daniel Ellsberg, you would think it would be such a big game changer, but instead it somehow blends itself into the backdrop of our
society. And I can tell you this because, from where I'm standing, yes, absolutely. It is one of those things where it sort of makes like a soft thud, but at the same time, it continues to spread. And at some point, it becomes such a widespread notion, this idea of privatized, partisan IT operatives being able to report whatever election results they want because they're on the same server that the GOP keeps their own files on. By the time it gets to that point where Anonymous is putting out a video before the election taunting Karl Rove, saying that they're monitoring his servers, waiting for some switch to happen on election night in 2012. And that's become the big story almost of election day, or people sharing this ridiculous Anonymous video. I'm always sort of struck that, at some point it got around, When I started doing this in 2006, the notion that Ohio had been stolen was so taboo, particularly from people in the Democratic Party. They didn't want to hear that. And then at some point over the last few years, I would hear people refer to Ohio being stolen like it was like the JFK, like obviously there was a conspiracy there, like sort of thing. And I can't tell you when that clicked, but it definitely takes more and more people presenting a good case that I should point out, has gone unchallenged. Nobody's refuted anything that came out in this film. In fact, that whole Mike Connell thing in the original version, I had to do a lot of like double checking and confirming on my own because it sounded so crazy. But I followed all the sources that Bob Petrakis and other people cited that were all in the public record. This is all reported by the Secretary of State's office, what they were doing when you sort of followed everything, and you realize like, wow, this is right there, and I can connect it. Not only did that was like one of the crazier things that I had come across, and I was maybe a little self-conscious about going out there with on my own. And then when Mike Connell died in a very suspicious plane crash with lots of clues left in its wake, after the film came out, that became a whole nother level. And so we updated the film to include that new ominous twist, and the fact that it got even more darker and twisted and dubious after that. And so the more these things get out there, the more people's perception is affected. And even if it's Karl Rove's perception of like, wow, they were after me and I'm just getting by the skin of my teeth, or if it's people who are the normal skeptics and they understand that this stuff goes on, then then that's when that's sort of when people have this threshold of what they feel like they can get away with.
I feel like I'm talking to Yoda. Well, if I was talking to Yoda, I would say, "What's your secret?"
Oh, I don't know, man.
People are. I'll put it another way. In traveling around the country and seeing so many activists, Gandhi said you can't teach the ambition to lead, and I would sort of change it up to you can't necessarily create the ambition for somebody to go out there and be an activist or an advocate, but they're going to start to take their baby steps. I taught snowboarding. Everybody wants to. You ask them, what do you want to do on your first day? They all say go in the half pipe or jump.
Yeah, right.
Like, okay, let's teach how to get off the chairlift. So how do you what's the chairlift scenario for you? How are you seeing you've empowered people to go out there with their own cell phones and shoot polling day or election day video. What are you advising people on how one person can make a difference?
I've found that everybody can, has their own sort of way to do it. And I feel like that's all I'm doing is my thing. And as much as I can keep up with my thing and stay on top of it, then that's the best thing. Because, somebody can come up with their own thing, like Doug Hughes, who's going to land a gyrocopter on the U.S. Capitol on April 15th and deliver messages to every member of Congress about it. And you're like, wow, I would not have come up with that. That's a real good example of somebody putting their own mind towards how am I going to make a difference. And so that was the one sort of conclusion I came away with in Pay to Play. With Free for All, I realized everybody can do something in our elections. With Pay to Play, I realized that everybody can try to use whatever their talents are or whatever their vision is to try to pull more people in. And really, as long as there's enough of a personal message to it, I think people will start to relate a lot more.
So now you just released a book. Can you tell us about Where Else But the Streets?
Yeah. So Where Else But the Streets is a look at all of the street artists that I got to interview and profile during making of Pay to Play, as well as a lot of artists that I wasn't able to include in the movie. And so continuing on the theme of protest and activism and street art as a form of civil disobedience and raising awareness, it's a showcase of political street art that sort of exploded in LA over the time that I happened to be making this film. And so there's a wealth of stuff, and I want people to be inspired and know that other people are taking to the streets where we are, because when you see something local, it makes such a bigger impression on you.
And will you? How can people find the book and buy the book?
Well, the book's on Amazon right now. It just came out this past week. And it's a really nice quality. It's 150 pages. And at some point, we'll come out with an ebook. But videos about the artists are on our website at whereelsebutthestreets.com.
And your documentaries, are most of them easy to access?
They're on iTunes and Amazon, Free for All and Pay to Play, and on Vimeo too, I think. And so, and we have a new one. We're doing a Kickstarter now for Price of Privatization, which is about the privatization of public resources, and that's sort of like where the money really goes in the pay-to-play system.
Give one example of that.
Well, the privatization of education,
right? Privatization
of water, the privatization of military contractors. The Chicago parking meters is probably the worst example, because that's the private consortium took over the public parking. They control all of public parking now in Chicago for the next 75 years, and they paid $1 billion for it, and they're going to make $11 billion on it. And so they're gouging the citizens, while one guy who helped bring that deal to the city council got a $2 million job at that company.
And was that a mutual, like a senior fund out of Australia? Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a lot of questions for you. Maybe we could continue. I want to give people enough to digest. I would really recommend that they go and see John's films, buy his book, and I'll give you the last word to inspire people.
I have a hip hop radio show where I play political quotes and activism sort of speeches mixed with hip hop and comedy quotes, and it's called Proper Propaganda. And you can visit that radio show at properpropaganda.tv. I feel like it's good activist soundtrack.
Well, I'm going to be out your way over the holidays, so I look forward to getting together with you. And
Okay,
Kevin.
cool.
All right.
Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. Good talking to you, Aaron.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.